Imagine this. You're the commander of an interstellar armada, your reputation built on the ashes of 100 conquered worlds. Your empire's technology is centuries ahead, your warships blot out the stars, and your very name strikes terror across the galaxy. You've arrived at a small, blue planet, Earth, expecting another easy victory, another world to add to your collection. The locals, they're just starting to figure out space travel. Piece of cake, right? That's exactly what Fleet Commander Zortak thought. But what he was about to discover would shatter everything he believed about the natural order of the cosmos. And it would all start with a single, defiant sentence that would echo through the halls of power on both worlds. The Arvaxian Empire was vast, ruthless, and utterly convinced of its own superiority. When their ships dropped out of hyperspace near Earth, the response from the planet was exactly what they expected. Panic, confusion, desperate chatter on global communications networks. Perfect. Zortak had done this dance countless times. Before, he'd watched civilizations crumble at the mere mention of Arvaxian conquest. The humans should have been groveling, begging for terms, promising their unconditional surrender. Instead, something completely unexpected happened. Admiral Amanda Taylor, a human officer with steely resolve and piercing green eyes, requested a diplomatic meeting, not a surrender ceremony. Not a plea for mercy. A meeting between equals. Zortak was intrigued despite himself. What could these primitive mammals possibly have to offer? He agreed, more out of amusement than any real concern. After all, what threat could they pose? The meeting place was a modest space station orbiting Earth, laughably primitive compared to Arvaxian engineering. Zortak entered the chamber flanked by his officers, their imposing forms casting shadows in the artificial light. The 6 humans waiting for them looked small, fragile, almost soft. The contrast was stark, one side representing the pinnacle of galactic military might, the other representing a species that had only recently learned to leave their own atmosphere. Zortak made his intentions crystal clear. Earth would join the Empire, and the humans would be grateful for the privilege. But Admiral Taylor wasn't playing the terrified alien role they'd all seen before. Her voice was steady, her posture confident, and her words carried an undercurrent of something the Arvaxians couldn't quite place. When she suggested they were a peaceful species that preferred cooperation, General Dre Zor, Tak's hot-headed military advisor, laughed like grinding metal. Cooperation with their betters. The very idea was absurd. The tension in the room was palpable as negotiations continued. The human delegation, including a biologist, a representative, and others whose roles weren't immediately clear, maintained their composure while the Arvaxians grew increasingly impatient. Zortak was about to deliver an ultimatum when Admiral Taylor dropped the first bombshell. She revealed that they'd been scanning the Arvaxian fleet since they entered the solar system 3 days ago. No alarms, no detection protocols triggered. Their stealth technology had blind spots that the humans had apparently identified and exploited. Before Zortak could process this impossible revelation, Taylor escalated the situation dramatically. She activated a display showing dozens of previously invisible devices positioned next to every Arvaxian ship. Nova mines. Enough power in each one to destroy his largest vessels. The demonstration was swift and brutal. One mine activated at minimal power, cleanly severing the propulsion section of one of his cruisers. The ship remained intact, its crew safe, but completely disabled. It was a warning, not an act of war. Zor, Tak's mind raced as he tried to comprehend what was happening. How had these supposed primitives developed technology that surpassed his own? Their intelligence reports had been catastrophically wrong. The humans weren't just hiding their capabilities. They'd been watching, studying, preparing for decades. But Admiral Taylor wasn't finished. She had one more revelation that would leave the proud fleet commander reeling and force him to make the most humiliating decision of his career. As he stood there, mandibles tight with barely contained fury, trying to salvage some semblance of control, Taylor calmly explained that this was just the beginning. Their lunar defense grid had the entire Arvaxian fleet targeted, and she casually mentioned something about off-world colonies that made Zortak's blood run cold. The simple blue planet he'd come to conquer was about to reveal itself as something far more dangerous, far more prepared, and far more powerful than anyone in the Empire had ever imagined. Now, caught between his pride and the reality of his fleet's vulnerability, Zortak faced an impossible choice: retreat and live with the shame, or risk everything in a battle he was suddenly far from certain he could win. The silence stretched longer than the vacuum of space itself. Zortak's eyes widened, his mandibles frozen mid-click. General Dre's growl died in his throat, replaced by a low, dangerous hiss. Admiral Amanda Taylor stood her ground, her simple words hanging in the air like a challenge flung at a star. Kneel first. The room, already tense, seemed to compress under the weight of that single sentence. The other humans in the delegation, Dr. Powell, Representative Diaz, the others exchanged glances, some surprised, others perhaps not quite as shocked as they should have been. It was clear this response, this audacious reversal, had been considered, if not planned. Zortak's tactical mind, always calculating, stumbled for a fraction of a second. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the one delivering ultimatums, the one dictating terms. Yet here was this small human female, standing barely past his shoulder height, turning his entire conquest narrative on its head with nothing but words and an ironclad certainty in her voice. The Arvaxian delegation was frozen in disbelief. General Dre took a menacing step forward, his ceremonial armor clanking, his four eyes blazing with fury. "You insignificant creature," he snarled, his voice like grinding metal. "You dare to challenge the might of the Arvaxian Empire." The air crackled with barely contained violence, but Zortak, despite his own shock, held up a hand, staying his furious subordinate. Something deeper than tactical analysis was at play. Here, he studied Admiral Taylor's face, searching for fear, for bluff, for any sign that this was an elaborate ruse. There was none. Her green eyes were steady, her posture calm. She wasn't bluffing. This realization hit him like a physical blow. How had his intelligence been so catastrophically wrong? How had a species they deemed primitive not only matched the Empire's technology but surpassed it in ways that defied comprehension? The implications were staggering, and they went far beyond this single meeting room. Before the situation could escalate further, Admiral Taylor moved with practiced calm. She tapped a small device on her wrist, and the wall view screen flickered to life. The image that appeared made every Arvaxian's blood run cold. It was a real-time feed of their own fleet, the proud armada that had arrived with such confidence just hours before, but now, clustered next to each of their gleaming warships, were small, previously invisible objects. Zortak's secondary heart nearly stopped. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cracking slightly with a mixture of rage and dawning horror. "A demonstration of time," Admiral Taylor replied coolly. "Those are what we call nova mines. Neutron oscillation, vaporization apparatus. Completely undetectable until activated. Each one has enough power to destroy your largest vessel." General Dre's laugh was harsh and desperate. "You are bluffing," he spat, though uncertainty crept into his voice. Admiral Taylor's smile was thin and dangerous. "Are we? Perhaps a demonstration is in order." She made another gesture, and one of the devices near a smaller Arvaxian ship glowed briefly before detonating. The explosion was contained, surgical, and devastatingly precise. Instead of obliterating the ship, it cleanly severed the vessel's propulsion section from its main hull. The ship remained intact, its crew likely unharmed, but completely disabled, drifting helplessly in the void. "That was at minimum power," Dr. Powell explained clinically. "No casualties, but your vessel is now inoperable." Zortak's mind raced, trying to process the impossible. How had they developed such technology? How had they remained hidden for so long? His entire worldview, built on the foundation of Arvaxian superiority, crumbled. The humans weren't just hiding. They had been watching, studying, preparing. This wasn't first contact initiated by the Arvaxians. It was first contact on human terms, timed perfectly to maximize their advantage. General Dre, ever the warrior, snarled and reached for his sidearm, but Zortak's tactical mind was already working furiously. He saw the trap, the bigger picture. If they had one mine, and they were willing to use it, how many more were out there? How many of his ships were now sitting ducks? "You realize this means war," General Dre snarled, his voice thick with rage and humiliation. "It doesn't have to be," Representative Diaz interjected quickly, trying to keep the situation from spiraling. "We are prepared to defend ourselves, but we'd prefer peaceful relations." "You call this peaceful?" Zortak gestured at the screen where his damaged ship drifted. "You have committed an act of war against the Empire, and you entered our system with conquest as your stated goal," Admiral Taylor countered, her voice steady. "We are simply demonstrating that we are not the easy target you believed us to be." The room fell into a tense silence, broken only by the hum of the station's systems. Zortak felt the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. Pride warred with pragmatism. His entire career, his reputation, his very identity as a conqueror of worlds, screamed for him to order an immediate attack, to wipe this insolent species from existence. But his tactical mind, lunging and calculating, whispered a different truth. If those devices were real, and the evidence was undeniable, ordering an attack now would be tantamount to ordering the suicide of his entire fleet. He had led dozens of conquest missions, never once retreating. The shame would be enormous. But the alternative, the loss of his fleet and the report he would have to send to the council, would be catastrophic. Finally, through gritted mandibles, he forced the words out. "What do you want?" It was a concession, a crack in the armor of Arvaxian dominance. Admiral Taylor's expression remained neutral, professional. A real negotiation. As equals, not predator and prey. The quantum-fold jump was instantaneous, a ripple in reality that placed the joint fleet mere light-minage from the unsuspecting Groven Advanced Scout Group. Zortak watched the tactical display with a satisfaction he hadn't felt in years. The Groven ships, sleek and organic-looking, but bristling with weapons, cruised lazily through space, confident in their numerical superiority and the perceived weakness of the Arvoxian forces in this sector. They were about to learn a harsh lesson about assumptions. Admiral Taylor stood beside him, her expression calm but focused. Her human intuition, combined with Arvoxian tactical doctrine and their shared intelligence, had placed them perfectly. "Status?" she asked quietly. "5 Groven scouts, standard patrol configuration," reported the Joint Tactical Officer, a young Arvoxian lieutenant who had adapted remarkably well to working with humans. "No indication they've detected us." Zortak's mandibles clicked in anticipation. Commence Phase 1. The human stealth carriers, their quantum fold drives allowing them to appear seemingly out of nowhere, materialized around the Groven ships. Simultaneously, the main Arvoxian fleet dropped from hyperspace behind them, cutting off any escape vector. The Groven commander's transmission was panicked, a screeching demand for identification and explanation. Zortak almost felt sorry for him. The battle, if it could be called that, was swift and decisive. The Groven ships, caught completely off and surrounded by technology they couldn't even begin to comprehend, offered minimal resistance. 2 were disabled by precisely placed quantum charges. Their hulls breached without destroying the valuable intelligence inside. 1 attempted to flee, only to find its path blocked by a human vessel that seemed to phase partially out of normal space. The last 2 surrendered, their hulls already targeted by a dozen combined weapon locks. As the last Groven ship powered down, Zortak allowed himself a rare smile. This was what true military power looked like. Not the crude campaigns of the past, but precision, coordination, and overwhelming technological surprise. Admiral Taylor nodded approvingly. "Groven tactical analysis confirms their main fleet is still 3 days out," she reported, reading from a datapad. "They won't expect this level of resistance. Then we will ensure they receive a clear message," Zortak replied. The capture of the scout ships yielded immediate results. Inside their data core were detailed plans for a full-scale invasion of the Tholian sector. Confirmation of the resource shortages Zortak's fleet was supposed to be experiencing, and, most importantly, the locations of several lightly defended Groven supply depots. Director Frost's intelligence had been flawless. The joint fleet didn't return to the Jupiter station. Instead, they launched a series of lightning raids on the supply bases, each strike perfectly coordinated between Arvoxian firepower and human stealth. The Groven rear areas descended into chaos. When their main fleet finally arrived in the Tholian sector, they found not the weakened, scrambling defenders they had planned to crush, but a reinforced, battle-ready force under Zortak's command, supported by intelligence that made their movements predictable. The second battle, the main engagement, was a masterpiece. The Groven fleet, already stretched thin and now operating with compromised supply lines, found themselves outmaneuvered at every turn. Human ships would appear behind their lines, strike a critical target, and vanish before Groven weapons could. Lock on Arvoxian vessels, guided by real-time human intelligence, would intercept Groven maneuvers before they were even executed. The Groven commander, facing annihilation and unable to comprehend how his advantage had evaporated, finally requested terms. Zortak, following the precedent set by Admiral Taylor months earlier, offered generous surrender conditions. The Groven fleet was disarmed, its senior officers held for war crimes related to their treatment of conquered populations, and the remainder integrated into a new, larger joint task force. The Groven hierarchy, learning of the disaster from a panicked communication relay, sued for peace. They agreed to withdraw from the Tholian sector entirely and pay massive reparations. The Tauric Dominion, watching these events unfold, quietly shelved its own aggressive plans. The message was clear. The balance of power in this region of the galaxy had shifted dramatically. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, watching the last Groven ships being escorted to internment facilities, Zortak reflected on the incredible journey. He had come to Earth intending to add it to the Empire's list of conquests. Instead, he had helped forge an alliance that had just reshaped the entire strategic landscape. Admiral Taylor joined him, her expression thoughtful. "The Imperial Council's response to your latest report was interesting," she said. "They authorized a commendation for tactical brilliance and requested a full strategic assessment of the joint fleet's capabilities." Zortak's laugh was surprisingly warm. "And what did you tell them?" "That we were just getting started," she replied with a smile. "That the Arvoxian Empire, now strengthened by human innovation, is prepared to meet any challenge." General Drake, who had reluctantly come to accept the alliance after witnessing its effectiveness, approached. Even he had to admit the results were undeniable. "Commander," he said, his tone respectful for once, "the Council also requested that you prepare a proposal for expanding this model to other potential allies." Zortak nodded. The old ways of conquest were giving way to something new, something stronger, an empire built not just on fear, but on partnership and mutual strength. Months later, the Jupiter station had become the bustling heart of a new interstellar coalition. Ships, bearing the markings of a dozen different species, came and went, sharing intelligence, coordinating patrols, and conducting joint training exercises. The Groven were being slowly reintegrated as junior partners, their aggression channeled into constructive endeavors. The Tauric Dominion had opened formal diplomatic relations. Even the distant and mysterious resonance had sent subtle signals of interest. Intrigued by humanity's unique approach to galactic politics, President Garcia, now speaking for a truly united Earth and its colonies, addressed the latest Interspecies Council meeting. "We have proven that cooperation is not a sign of weakness," he declared, "but a path to unprecedented strength." Zor Tak, now unofficially the Supreme Commander of the Coalition Defense Force, found himself agreeing completely. He thought back to that first meeting with Admiral Taylor, her calm declaration that humans didn't kneel easily. How right she had been. They hadn't knelt. Instead, they had stood up, extended a hand, and changed everything. Admiral Taylor, now a respected figure across multiple species, caught his eye across the council chamber. She raised an eyebrow, a silent question about his thoughts. He gave a slight nod, his mandibles clicking in what humans had come to recognize as his version of a smile. The galaxy was a different place now. Larger, more complex, but also safer and more hopeful. And it all started with one simple, defiant sentence spoken by a human who refused to accept the old order. Humans didn't kneel easily. They rose to meet the challenge, and in doing so, lifted everyone else up with them.